Hi everyone, I'm Katie Tam. I'm one of the health coaches at Logansport Memorial Hospital, and today I'm going to be talking to you about stress and burnout. We're going to explore the differences between stress and burnout. So, stress unfortunately is one of those things that we're never going to be able to eliminate completely. It is necessary for survival. Most events in life are stressful, whether it's good or bad stress. So our goal really is not to eliminate it, but how can we use it to our advantage and again find ways that we can reduce it or just find a way to turn it into a positive for ourselves. The first thing we'll go over is the two major types of stress that you might be experiencing. And the first one is acute stress. So think car accident, a thrilling ride, giving a speech, maybe you're closing the deal, going on a phone call. Basically, it's that fight or flight response system. It's typically short term. It's very easy to identify the symptoms in those types of situations. And during this acute stress or one of these situations, adrenaline and cortisol are released. So that adrenaline is going to increase your heart rate, it's going to elevate things like your blood pressure, the symptoms that we have listed there. So you might start feeling anxious, tense, shortness of breath, dizziness, sweaty. Whereas cortisol is going to start increasing your blood glucose. It's going to enhance your brain's use of the glucose. It's going to increase the availability of other substances that kind of repair our tissues. It's going to curb functions that would be considered non essential in a fight or flight kind of situation. It can start to alter our immune system responses and it can suppress our digestive system. Um, Basically, what it's doing is it's just giving us the energy we need to deal with that stressor, especially that glucose. So it's going to be released in our bloodstream instead of storing it to give us that burst of energy to get through this type of situation. Then we have chronic stress. So it is prolonged, and we have maybe perceived little to no control to getting this stress under wraps. So that fight or flight response system releases those stress hormones to help us get through these situations. Whereas with chronic stress, those hormones are going to be continually released. And while we learned it's beneficial in the short term, it's definitely not beneficial to that long term exposure to those. And we're going to get into what, that causes health wise. We'll talk a little bit more about the symptoms, but basically, this is just, the prolonged exposure to those. A lot of times we might not even realize that we're experiencing chronic stress because we've gotten to the point where we just kind of ignore or it's just not affecting us like we think it is. So, definitely something we want to get under control if we can, or at least be able to recognize so we can start implementing things. Next, we're going to explore some symptoms that are associated with that chronic stress that we were just talking about. And as we go through these, be thinking, what are some of your symptoms that you might be experiencing that fall into this? So you might be more short-tempered, irritable, angry. Maybe you're experiencing migraines, headaches, any anxiousness. You're more worrisome than normal, depressed. You might start seeing your blood pressure creep up. Possibly you're gaining weight, you don't know why. Um, some heart problems, so you might see things like high cholesterol associated with this. You're not sleeping well, or you're not being able to go to sleep, or just quality of sleep in general. So back pain, some muscle tension, difficulty focusing. You might feel like you want to isolate, some fatigue, some exhaustion. And as we go on, you'll see that how these symptoms are pretty similar to burnout, and we'll get into like the differences between that burnout and just these chronic stress symptoms. Before we get into burnout, though, I do want to talk about some health complications of chronic stress. So we'll get more into the different body systems and how it affects that. So first up, we have our brain, and it can cause issues with memory. Um, so that's why we forget things or we feel scatterbrained when we are more stressed out. It can cause our brain cells to shrink and eventually die off. And when that brain loss or brain cell loss happens, it can be permanent. But good news, exercise can actually renew brain cells. So that's something we'll get into near the end. But this again is how it can affect our brain if it's something that we're chronically dealing with. Next, we have our respiratory system. So, for people without respiratory issues or any type of diseases associated with it, it's generally not a problem. You may not be experiencing too many of these symptoms unless you're having like panic attacks. But if you already have pre existing conditions related to your respiratory system, such as asthma, maybe COPD, chronic bronchitis, these things can be exacerbated by chronic stress. So, shortness of breath, rapid breathing, asthma attacks, panic attacks, things like that. Then we have heart health, and we hit on this just a little bit earlier. And when we are chronically stressed, our blood pressure tends to go up a little bit, and it works our heart a little bit harder. And then we talked about how adrenaline and cortisol can cause issues with just racing heartbeat. We're trying to get through that dangerous, I say that in quotation marks, dangerous situation, or that fight or flight situation. So it causes our body to go in high alert. So when those things are happening and they're raising our blood pressure continuously, then our blood pressure can make our heart work harder, but also that can make our arteries become a little more inflexible. So that can lead to things like higher cholesterol levels because there's a plaque buildup. And then not only that, when that plaque buildup happens and we have those inflexible arteries, it can cause blockages, which can lead to a heart attack or a stroke. Then we have our muscles, and when we have that chronic muscle tension from the stress that we're experiencing, it tends to be in our shoulders, our neck, our head, which lead to things like headaches and migraines. Not only that, we might start experiencing low back pain, upper extremities, and when we are just so tight, that's going to cause, not cause, but there's going to be an increased risk for muscle injury. Then we have blood sugar. So we mentioned earlier how during our fight or flight response system, when that's activated, we have that increased release of glucose just to get through, give us the energy to get through that situation. So when we have that continued release, it could eventually lead to diabetes for some people, especially people who are more vulnerable to type 2 diabetes. Some of us will be able to use up that or like reabsorb the blood sugar, whereas some of us won't. It can lead to diabetes. And then unused glucose can also lead to fat storage issues. Then we have weight gain. So this one, when we have that repeated elevation of cortisol levels, it can lead to visceral fat storage, adipose fat or adipose tissue increase. So that's one way that it can cause issues with weight gain. And then the other one has to do with the blood sugar that we just talked about. So cortisol levels, um, they cause issues with how we use glucose. It can lead to issues with our insulin and the way that it's used up in our body. So when there's that imbalance there or there's that issue there, it can cause our cells to cry out for more energy. So one way that our body does that is to send hunger signals, which can lead to overeating. So, that's where this appetite and cravings comes into play. So it may send out hunger signals. We need more food, but also we talked about how when you are craving food, sometimes, especially when you're stressed out, it may be those higher calorie, carb heavy, fat heavy foods that we consider comfort foods. So that also plays a role into this. And moving into the digestive system, so you might feel like you have more issues with heartburn, ulcers, nausea. Your sensations might be a little different. Like you might feel butterflies in your stomach, maybe vomiting if your stress is severe enough. And then, like if you're, dealing with the chronic stress, you might have those ulcers that we just talked about, acid reflux. So there's a lot of digestive system type things that you could be experiencing. You may have issues going to the bathroom, things like that. Then reproductive system. So this can affect normal functioning of your reproductive system and then cause increased risk for infections as well. Then the next two here are our nervous system and our immune system. So over time, that continuous activation of our nervous system, it's really going to drain our body. It's going to cause a lot of fatigue. I'm sure we've all felt this one way or another. And then the immune system, so when we have that cortisol being released constantly, it can cause some chronic inflammation as well. And that just is going to wreak havoc on our immune system. So maybe you're sick all the time, and maybe you're having colds, the flu, infections. It can even increase your risk for cancer. There's some research that shows that it can increase your risk for autoimmune disease. So all sorts of issues when it comes to your immune system if you're not keeping that chronic stress in check. So let's get into stress versus burnout now. So, stress is a state of worry or mental tension caused by a difficult situation, whereas burnout is a state of emotional, physical, and mental exhaustion, cynicism, and self doubt caused by excessive and prolonged stress. So, typically, stress is going to be about too much, while burnout is about not enough. So, we have too many demands, too many responsibilities. Whereas in burnout, we're feeling empty, we have nothing, we're devoid of motivation, we don't care anymore, we're done with it. So we'll get into this even more as we go throughout the presentation. To get into it a little bit more, so the normal stress, we have it's situational or acute versus burnout, which is chronic and pervasive. And typically quick fixes can work for normal stress, typically. Whereas burnout, you're probably going to have to really look at things and find a significant intervention to get it taken care of. And on the previous slide, we talked about exhaustion, cynicism, and self-doubt. So stress usually has one or more of those components, whereas burnout is going to have all three present. And to get a little more into exhaustion, that's a mismatch between workload, time, and resources, whereas cynicism, you're feeling detached or callous, maybe even negative about your work or company. You're thinking, why am I even doing this? And then self-doubt, you don't trust yourself. You have no confidence in your skills, your abilities, or your judgment. And, just to get more into that, quick fixes versus significant intervention. So a lot of times these quick fixes might be like, I'm going to do something, take some time away, essentially, and I feel good while I'm gone. But when I come back, things may not be working well. So that's where we're going to get into that quick fix versus that significant intervention. That's kind of the main thing there when we start looking at some of these other things. So when we go through these burnout symptoms, I do want you to again ask yourself if you're feeling any of these things. And if you're answering yes more than no, then you are possibly experiencing some burnout. Or maybe if you're a manager, you're seeing some of these things with your employees, or maybe a spouse or a friend. So be thinking through those things when we talk about this. So, and again, you're going to see that some of them are very closely aligned with the chronic stress type of symptoms. But the difference again is that there's a lot more present versus just some or the other. So some physical signs and symptoms: you're feeling tired, you're drained, you're getting sick, you're having infections, illnesses, you're having those headaches, migraines, muscle pain. Maybe you even have a change in appetite. You're sleeping worse than before. We've got our emotional signs and symptoms next. You are really starting to lose confidence. So you have self-doubt, a sense of failure, you're feeling helpless, you feel like you can't, backed in a corner, you're defeated, you're feeling isolated and alone, you have no motivation, your outlook is becoming more negative and cynical, You're just not finding any satisfaction in anything. You're finding it hard to feel accomplished in your work. Then we'll get to our behavioral symptoms here, signs and symptoms. And this is, withdrawing from responsibilities at this point. Now you're really trying to isolate yourself from others. You're procrastinating. So you just taking longer to get things done essentially. You might be using food, drugs, or alcohol to cope. So now we're coming into some negative coping mechanisms. Maybe you're getting angrier and you're taking frustration out on others. And then another one would be skipping work, where you start to come in late and you are leaving early. Last part of the presentation here, we are going to go over some strategies. And again, I want you to really be thinking about, why do you want to manage your stress or burnout? How would managing this contribute to your other goals in your life? It doesn't have to be physical health related. It can be any other type of goal that you have in your life. Try to relate this to what you're currently going through or what you're currently wanting to work on. And another question for you guys to think about, like this would be a part, and if we were doing this in person, I'd be asking you guys this. So I do want you to, again, think about some typical solutions that you try when you're feeling stressed out or on the verge of burnout. And I mean, a lot of times that looks like, maybe it's going on a walk. Maybe some of you want to go get a massage or go do something you enjoy. It could be a hobby of some sort, hanging out with friends, really just doing anything that you feel like you can escape from what you are dealing with in the moment. That's typically what most of us do. I do want to briefly touch on counterproductive coping mechanisms. So I do hear these a lot when I am coaching. Emotional eating, primarily, a lot of people are telling me how much they eat when they are feeling a lot of stress. I know a lot of us probably deal with, just kind of like the doom scrolling, I guess is what it would be called, where maybe you just get stuck watching a TV show or you're on your phone a lot, especially at night, where you're just kind of scrolling. Sometimes overspending can play into that, and then substance use. So we talked about alcohol, nicotine, drugs, those things can all come into play and maybe make us feel better in the moment, but over time, it's not going to help. So we're going to try to stay away from those obviously during this presentation, but I did want to briefly touch on them being counterproductive versus helping you out in the long run. Then this relates to what I asked earlier about, what are you doing for stress management or when you're on the verge of burnout? So this, while those while those things are good, it can kind of fall into this faux self-care cycle. So at the top we have the stressor, then we have this momentary self-care. So you could insert any of the things that I listed earlier, but you could easily insert whatever you tend to do. And while they do bring some sense of relief, and there is a time and place for these are good things. I'm not saying they're bad. When we return to our regular life, things typically haven't changed. How many times have you heard someone say, or even yourself say, I don't even want to take PTO because I know when I get back, my email is going to be miles long, or I'm going to have to put out all these fires that happened while I was gone. I'm going to be on PTO, but people are going to be contacting me still. So your circumstances certainly haven't changed if you do something like take a PTO day, or maybe you go get a massage, but then you come back to the exact same very stressful work environment or home environment. So that's this faux self-care cycle where we're just not really addressing what maybe the issue is, or um, gotten more into some of these significant preventative things that we can do to change our circumstances. So again, be thinking through, what are some things that you do for self-care? Um, are they only momentary? How do you feel when you do them? How do you feel when you come back? What happens in the long term? What have you tried? What haven't you tried? So again, keep this in your mind as we're going through. and trying to help yourself get out of this, chronic stress state or this burnout stage that you might be in. So, getting more into this faux versus real self-care, the faux side is described from the outside. It's typically a noun that is going to describe an activity or a product. So we talked about, a yoga class, meditation app, face cream. When we come back from what we're from doing something, buying something, whatever it is, it maintains our status quo, whether it's at work, relationship, family, does nothing to change those larger systems that are probably the issue. And it often leaves us feeling even more trapped, even further away from ourselves. Maybe it's guilt that we're feeling, or we're neglecting other responsibilities, things like that. So it does allow you to avoid or brush aside any type of issues that you might be feeling with it. Whereas the real self care originates within you. It's typically a verb. It's going to describe some internal decision making process. So it's really the process that goes on before you make the choice to attend a yoga class, listen to a meditation app, or put on like a fancy face cream. And it's going to allow you to get your needs met in your relationship. So setting boundaries. It can affect, changing your family, your workplace, your larger systems, and it's going to bring you closer to you. It's going to bring you closer to your values, what's more important to you. So you're not going to have this like cognitive dissonance going on. And it's going to require you to do some hard things like learning to cope with these feelings of guilt as part of that process. I've heard a lot of people talk about when they set boundaries, they feel guilty, they feel like they're in the wrong. So you do have to kind of come to terms with those feelings. Um, so again, it comes with that short-term emotional cost in what you're feeling, but you're going to be better off in the long run when you are practicing these real self-care um, techniques. We touched briefly on values on the previous slide, and I think it is worth exploring this idea in this presentation. So, our values are our guiding principles. They shape our decisions, our actions, our goals. They reflect what we care about, what we stand for, what we want to achieve. Um, so, it is really important to think about if our actions and decisions are actually in alignment with our core values. Because if they aren't, you're going to be feeling some stress, worry, anxiety, typically. So if we don't know what our values are, then you could be feeling lost. You could be feeling like you're not connected to who you really are. And when they're clearly defined, we can make decisions that truly support the life we want to live. We can set boundaries. We can make decisions based off of those values. So I really encourage you to take time to think that through. There's all sorts of ways you can go through this. You can do like a type of exercise, a priority matrix, a vision board. You could talk with others just to come up with maybe a list of values that are true to you. Because like I said, when you have those clearly defined, it's going to help you make decisions that support the life that you want to live. And that it is, something to say as well. It will change as life goes on. When we're in our 20s, it's going to be a lot different than when we're married with kids, or, in our 50s as we age. Any area of your life, they are going to change a little bit. So it is good to do this, um, every once in a while just to get an idea of where you might be at with your core values and how they support the decisions that you want to make and how it can help with that. Another idea to get yourself moving into these, significant interventions would be starting with a stress journal. Because again, some of us have an idea of what might be going on and how it might be affecting us, but sometimes it's just nice to write it down and analyze it a little bit more. So a stress journal, it's going to help with identifying precisely when you might feel stress, what the causes are, how it affects your work, your life, your family. You can discover what levels of pressure you actually might operate at effectively. Some people do really well when they're under pressure, and some people don't. Some people just completely shut down. And that could even go to, okay, you might be good short term in high levels of stress, but if you're constantly dealing with those, then that may not be a good thing for you. You can analyze your reactions. So it could be, was your blow up about something completely unnecessary or unhelpful? Are you trying to um, control how you react? Um, are you trying to control too much in your environment when you need to maybe let go of certain things? You can explore those emotions. So we talked about that on the other slide about how sometimes when people set boundaries, they actually feel this like guilt or this shame for sticking up for themselves or for changing certain things in their life because it causes other people to be mad at you. So what I'm saying is, continue to explore some of those emotions that come up. And there's some additional questions to ask yourself, that you and this was just an example I found online. You could do whatever you want. I just wanted to give you guys an idea. You could do more than this, less than this. You could just do work, you could do family, you could do home, you could just write. You don't have to have like a matrix here or like an Excel spreadsheet going through all these things. But, they had on this particular one, like timing of it, the date, what were some of the stressful events that they had and how did it um, you know, mess with their mood? How did they feel as far as stress level? What were some of the physical symptoms? How did they handle it? So you can see I shouted at the IT guy, I vented angrily. So they have some things that they could probably work on, with how they handled their stress. So they might be feeling a little better, but man, they got really frustrated. They're very worried, very angry. So you can do something like that as well, just to see um, what's really causing your issues. Getting to the root of some of those things and just figuring out what actually might be going on. Which leads me into analyzing your journal. So if you're going to do something like this, try to record for 2 weeks. It's going to give you some good information, and you can do this, fairly often if you want. You can see how things are going, or if you're in a new situation or you're starting to feel it a little bit more, it might be a good time to put this in place. But looking through what were your most frequent stressors, what are the most unpleasant. So there's a difference there. So obviously, some things are going to be much more unpleasant versus things that you're kind of dealing with on a regular basis. Does something need to be fixed? What are the issues? Start listing ways that you can change your situation for the better. um, how can you problem solve your current situation? And then how did you feel? So we talked about that a little bit. Did it affect productivity, your effectiveness at work? It could be even at home, it doesn't have to be at work. Your happiness, your levels of pressure can you handle? All good things. And you can add, like I said, whatever you want. You can take away whatever you want. It's obviously for your own um, information, so you can use this however you need to get yourself where you want to be. We've talked a lot about setting boundaries during this presentation, so we're finally going to get into it a little bit more. And first, more questions for you guys to consider. When we're thinking about this slide here, I want you to think about what relationships are bringing you stress, anxiety, worry. Are you attempting to control someone's emotions, thoughts, or behavior? Do you feel mistreated or taken advantage of? Does the value that you feel from others change based on how well you fulfill their requests or their obligations? Have you identified any false beliefs that have maybe driven you to have unhealthy boundaries in the past? Now, getting into some ideas. First up here, communicating clearly what you need. We're not mind readers. No one's a mind reader. So being able to tell someone exactly what you need is a huge deal. And this could come from maybe you just don't know. Maybe you don't know, and that's where that values-based exercise can be really helpful, or even the stress journal exercise can be helpful because it helps you identify what those values are and what you might need to get to where you want to be. And then on top of that, holding others accountable and following through on those boundaries. So oftentimes I'll hear people talk about, I know what I need and I've talked to that person about it, but nothing ever happens. So then there needs to be the accountability aspect. Pause before saying yes. So really thinking about why are you saying yes? So again, this goes back to that values in the stress journal. A lot of times in coaching, I'll hear people talking about just time, obligations. They don't have any time to do anything, too many things going on. So slow down and think about what you're saying yes to and if you actually need to say yes or if it's important to you. Time management skills. So this could be in the form of time blocking on your calendar to just get organized, to-do list or priority list, scheduling time for yourself. A lot of people do this, I, myself included. I will literally block off my calendar to just get up and move around, get away from my desk, or maybe it's after work to go to the gym. Anything I can do to just give myself a little bit of time. Delegating or automating tasks. So this is another one. A lot of people don't want to delegate because they don't think people can do it the way that they want them to. So that's something where we have to kind of explore those feelings, those thoughts, those emotions that arise when you try to give a task to someone else. And then planning ahead. So procrastination coming into play a little bit here. So how can we establish some boundaries around that procrastination? Taking a break. Don't check your email at home. Don't answer your phone at dinner or during family time. Step away from your desk at lunch. Um, I going back to that example I used earlier about people taking time off and taking their work computer or their email or their email and they're checking things, they're letting people call them, and maybe you establish a boundary by saying, I'm on vacation, please talk to me unless, it's an emergency. Please talk to me when I return about this issue. Stepping away from your desk at lunch, actually taking your lunch. There's a lot of people that don't take a lunch, even though they're supposed to be. So these are just some ways to establish boundaries. Another tip would be talking with your leaders or maybe your partner at home, and defining some tasks and roles and expectations. Again, if these are muddy waters, then that can cause a lot of issues with burnout or chronic stress. So defining those and getting a clear idea of what you need to be doing. Maybe you don't have the right tools or the right resources. So communicate what you need to do your job efficiently or to, have a home that's running well. If you really need to reduce strain, then change up your physical workspace. Whether that's a different chair, different workstation, what do you need to reduce strain? Ask for help and then accept it as well before things get overwhelming. This is a hard one for a lot of us. I hear this one a lot. People don't know how to ask or they don't want to ask because of the negative connotation it might have with it, or it gets too late and people then have to kind of accept help before it gets overwhelming. Discuss wellness resources available to you. So most companies have different wellness benefits that are available. So definitely check that one out. And then consider a flexible workday if it applies. Sometimes that's not always the case for some of us. So if that's something that would help you out and be a good intervention, then that would be definitely something to discuss with your leader. This one goes in line with the counterproductive responses that I was talking about earlier. So these would be the healthy responses. Of course, I'm going to talk about exercise and nutrition. So exercise, we talked about how it can renew brain cells, but there's many other benefits to getting exercise in. So any way you can fit it in, walking, going to the gym, working out at home, walking around the block during lunch, going to the gym before or after work or on a lunch break, walking with your family after dinner. I mean, literally any way that you can get it in, doing something that you enjoy. Nutrition. So it is important to, eating a healthy, balanced lunch, snacks, eating regularly. So I put breakfast on there, but it really should just say eating regularly. Avoiding nicotine, alcohol, caffeine, because those things can exacerbate maybe some of our stress symptoms that we're already feeling. Plus, there can be counterproductive. And I should say caffeine if you're not used to drinking it or you're drinking an excessive amount, trying to limit that if you can. Hobbies. So this is where we call them faux self-care, but these things are absolutely still beneficial. It's just they're not powerful enough necessarily to produce the change that you need to reduce burnout or chronic stress. So, doing your hobbies, things that you enjoy, being creative, reading, music, painting, getting outside, being with friends, uh, anything you can do to kind of just do something you enjoy. Then the last one here, exercising your power and keeping things in perspective. So this goes into control the things that you can control. A lot of us want to try to control things that are just out of our hands. So anything you can do to control how you react and how you interpret things. So, trying to identify those areas of irrational thinking, learning from your past, accepting change, trying to maintain a hopeful outlook and being, grateful for things. Um, thinking about adapting to situations. So, reframing problems, looking at the big picture can help things keep things in perspective. You can adjust standards or expectations. I know myself, I struggle with high expectations on certain things, so I really have to look at my standards for some things and be like, okay, that's maybe a little unrealistic. I need to walk myself back and become a little more grounded. Um, I think I already mentioned practicing gratitude. You could even throw volunteering in there because sometimes volunteering or when we're um, looking at things that we are interested in, like a cause of some sort, it can really help keep things in perspective. And there's been enough research that shows that when we're volunteering our time or helping out with a charity of some sort, it can help reduce our stress actually. Um, so again, going back into the exercising your power and keeping things into perspective. So adapting, it helps you be more resilient. Um, so again, control what you can control, which is yourself and how you react and how you interpret things. Then recharge and relax. So we can kind of, while our stress doesn't go away completely, we can try to recharge by returning to pre-stress levels, kind of reset those. So um, use that PTO. Don't work while you're on vacation. Try to turn off your phone, no, news, social media every once in a while just to get a break from everything. We get a constant feed of information that we're just not meant to see all the time. So, any way you can take a break from those. I mentioned resetting, reset your nervous system. So, this would be like meditation or gratitude. Calm and Insight Timer are two apps that I've used before. I'm partial to the Insight Timer, but there's lots of different prompts that help with like meditation or deep breathing, guided imagery. So, and then you can use them. They have some for work, they have some for the morning, for sleep, for kids. It is nice to just be able to do some deep breathing. There's a ton of research that supports deep breathing and how it can affect our nervous system for the better. You can also get on like YouTube will have things, your Apple Watch or like a Fitbit will have like a box breathing type of thing. Mindfulness is another one. Mindfulness is focusing purposely on a single activity. So you could do something as such as mindful walking. Maybe you sit down, close your eyes, and do some mindful listening, and you just focus on that single activity. And if you're not practicing those things regularly, they might be kind of hard for you at first, because it's really hard to just calm yourself, your nervous system down and focus on one thing and like the deep breathing. But the more you practice it, the better it will be. So I do highly encourage you to try some of those things out when you can. And then lastly here, getting support. So this is one that's mentioned all the time and for good reason. So look into your employee assistance program. A lot of times there's going to be some type of mental health professional or like a counseling service, a therapy service that is available to you. Um, Prioritizing positive relationships, joining a community group. So there again, there's research out there that supports having that social group or that community group can really help with the mental aspect of things. And then giving support to others, finding a purpose. I mentioned volunteering earlier or just giving support to a cause or a charity. It is so helpful to get into something like that. Then the last bit here, I promise we only have a couple more slides. This is the roadmap for reducing stress or burnout on the next slide. So how do we implement this? And I'm very simply just having a what, a why, and a how. So what are you trying to achieve? Set some goals around those. So we've got SMART goals there: specific, measurable, attainable, relevant, and like a time frame. So, thinking about what you're trying to do, what you're trying to achieve, why is it important to you? What's your motivation behind it? If it's not important to you, you're probably not going to have any desire to achieve it, or you're going to get burned out really quickly on trying to get that. And then how, what are your values? So we talked about that earlier. How do your values play into this? And what decisions or steps do you need to take to achieve that goal to help with reducing that chronic stress or reducing that burnout or getting out of that burnout stage? And this doesn't even have to be applied to your stress or burnout. This can be applied to like literally anything in your life that you're wanting to achieve. But in terms of stress, I wrote up there the best approach is prevention. So the more you can look at your systems, at and what might be causing these issues, and getting into that real self-care cycle, the better it's going to be for you. And once you've done it once, it gets really easy to identify these things and kind of move through these situations. And you can take what you learn and apply it the next time that you might come to a difficult decision or a fork in the road or a boundary that needs to be set. So it's good to kind of just start with this, and then you can continue to move through it a little bit. So that is the end of the presentation. We went through, like I said, the differences between stress and burnout. We talked about some ideas on how to reduce stress and burnout, and then how to maybe implement that roadmap at the end. If you have any questions or comments, you can email me at ktam@logansportmemorial.org, or you can call me at 574-725-2012, and I'm option number 1. Thank you for listening and have a great day.